We are called to be friends. Now, this will be no surprise to many of you who have been with me for the last couple of years. I learned to appreciate friendship on a whole new level when I started reading Augustine. Many of you know I have a great fondness for Augustine. And if you read his Confessions, friendship comes off the page constantly. He's a man who always had friends. He saw the great value in friends. One instance, before he's a Christian, he talks about stealing some pears. This is one of the really important scenes in the Confessions because there's two things he wants to accomplish with this pear story. One, he wants to show you the depravity of our souls. He wants to show you how wicked we are and perverse because he confesses he wasn't hungry when he stole the pears. He had better pears at home. He stole them for the pure delight in stealing pears. He's showing how wicked we are and that we delight in sin. We can see the logic of some sin if someone's hungry and they steal. But here he's actually revealing that we sin because we love sin. The second thing we see from the pear story is he talks about how his friends stealing the pears are one of the reasons he stole the pears. He sees the influence of others upon him. He sees that bad company corrupted his character, which wasn't good to begin with, but further. He sees the power of influence of others. He always has friends with him. Throughout all of his travels, he always has friends. Let's get to the good part of the friendship. Now, I think most of us probably know the conversion story of Augustine. He goes outside, he's praying, God's been working on him, it's clear that God's calling him, and he hears a young child singing a song, Tolle lege, take and read. So he goes and he reads Romans and he's converted. But he sets this up so beautifully. Preceding that conversion, he tells of 3 different stories about how 3 different friends told him about Christ. He shares all the different testimonies of other friends finally led him and opened up his heart to receive Christ, the best friend. Friends had a very important influence upon him, and he sees the value of friendship. It's important for us to be challenged with the idea that we need others because, as I said, we are self-reliant. And being a self-reliant Christian is an oxymoron. You can't be that way. You can't be a Christian and be self-reliant. You can say, well, I rely upon God. Yes, but God has built you and created you to rely upon his other believers. You cannot call Christ your head if you are not committed to his body. He's called us to himself, and therefore he's called us to one another. One of the most interesting statements in our text this morning comes from verse 10 as we think about friendship. He mentions here Mark, the cousin of Barnabas. Now, we've seen Mark before, if we think about the Bible temporally. This is taking place about 12 years after the event of Acts 15, verses 37 through 39. In Acts 15, Barnabas and Paul are about to go on another mission trip, and Barnabas wants to bring his cousin, Mark. And Paul says, well, I'm not taking him again. Last time he fled. Paul's got some bitterness towards Mark because he abandoned him. And then this disagreement about Mark and if they should take him led, our translation says, led to a strong disagreement, a sharp disagreement between Paul and Barnabas. In Acts 15, we see a divide. We see an argument. We see friendships severed, hindered. Here in this passage, we see reconciliation has taken place. Now, Paul doesn't talk about the reconciliation, but we see what happens in Acts 15. 12 years later, those who had a sharp disagreement, they're reconciled. Mark and Barnabas are blessings to Paul. He considers them friends. A reconciliation has taken place. Now, this is one of the reasons we're called to be friends. Because finding forgiveness in friends is one of the best ways to discover and experience the sweetness of forgiveness that we find in Christ. Yes, to know that we are forgiven in Christ is the most important knowledge we have. It's the most important relationship we have. but having others in your life. Experiencing forgiveness from others is a way that Christ intends us to experience his forgiveness. So the church is supposed to be a unique community. Most communities, most groups, they want to admit others and accept them as they are. And we want to love and welcome all types of people, but we do not accept sinners with sin. We appreciate you, we welcome you, but we do not expect sin to linger in your life. When you come into the church of Christ, we are trying to encourage you, admonish you, warn you of sin and its danger. The goal of becoming a Christian is to unite with others so that you are cleansed and purified. That's what Paul has said his purpose has been in Colossians, to present you blameless, without blemish. The goal in coming together as a church is that we accept one another. We know that each other are sinners, and we're seeking to be purified by one another. When we have had someone wrong us or sin against us, we must be quick to forgive. Bitterness is lingering. Hatred is looming in our hearts. When someone sins against us, we must be quick to remember the great forgiveness we've received from Christ. We must be quick to share that forgiveness with others. Now, this is scary business. We've talked about this a number of times. I think it's extremely important for us to know. Confessing sin and forgiving sin is scary business because you're entrusting yourself to one another. We need to be bold in confessing sin. We need to be bold in forgiving sin. As we think more about friendship, there's a secular philosopher that I think speaks a lot of truth about friendship, and we're going to think about that and apply it. This philosopher says that true friendship can only happen between two good men. Here's a quote: "Those whose actions and lives leave no question as to their honor, purity, equity, and liberality, who are free of greed, lust, and violence, and who have the courage of their convictions. Those are the only people who can really have friendships." Because a friendship is a union built upon virtue. You have to be able to share your experiences. You have to be able to share your purposes. You have to have a mutual goodwill and affection. This is a very high standard for who can be a friend. And, well, if we're truly honest with ourselves, only Christ can be that kind of friend to us. Only Christ is without question pure in his motives, his equity. He's free of greed and lust and violence. So Christ is that best friend, but then we are called to be friends with one another. For a Christian, this means that we must be submitted to Christ with one another. We must be committed to his laws, his commands, and his way. So for a Christian, if we're going to have a united base for our friendship, first it's the law of Christ. This is what our friendship is built upon. What he has said is good and right. This is what we say is the basis for how we should be conducting ourselves as friends. Secondly, the purpose of Christ needs to be the focus of our friendship. It's not on the worldly culture that says it's our immediate gratification and our worldly lusts that need to be fulfilled. No, our purpose is to glorify God and enjoy him forever, and to do that together. To be committed to one another to the point that we are committed to loving one another and have each other love God more. Again, our friendships need to be based upon the forgiveness of Christ. That's what we're together. We've all experienced the forgiveness of Christ. We need to be sharing that forgiveness. This means we confess our sin. When you confess sin to someone, you're modeling a hatred for sin. It is a spiritual discipline that is good to do, because when you confess sin to someone, you are modeling for them that you take sin seriously, its destructive power, and its looming death. It is good to confess sin to one another because it models a hatred for sin. When you confess your sin, it's also demonstrating a faith in God. It's demonstrating a faith in the forgiving power of the gospel. And that's a way to encourage one another, by confessing your sin. Thirdly, when you confess your sin, you're demonstrating a trust for the brothers and sisters that are also Christ. When you confess sin, you're actually able to follow Christ or God and God by using your evil for good. Your sin is evil. When you confess sin, you're actually able to use your evil for good because you're encouraging others by modeling a hatred for sin, demonstrating a faith in God, and demonstrating a trust in others. So we're called to be friends.